Welcome to Assembly Calendar. I'm Mike Friesen, and with us for our program today, Assemblyman Brian Kolb. Brian Kolb represents the 131st Assembly District in New York State, an Assembly District that includes the counties of Ontario and Seneca. And we want to thank you folks all throughout the area for joining us today. Big week in Albany. This is Budget Week. This is the week that the legislature, the Assembly and Senate are supposed to get together and put the finishing touches on budget plans. It's been a long process going back to the beginning of the session when the governor handed off his proposal to the legislature. Now the Assembly's on record with its budget, the Senate's got its budget, so there's three different budgets out there, and it's time to massage them into one neat little package. Not always the easiest thing to do.
Well, of course it's not, and there's a lot of diverse interests and priorities depending upon where you live in the state. Certainly what your politics are in terms of the state legislature and the governor, quite frankly. So there's been a lot to talk about. I actually sent a letter back to the governor back in December before he came out with his executive budget to outline some things that hopefully he might be thinking about for his executive budget in terms of, as an example, making the middle class tax cut permanent versus temporary, and a variety of other what I would call pro-business, pro-economic growth ideas. And then, of course, after the two majorities in both houses of the legislature sent out their one-house budgets, I reiterated another letter to the governor and all the legislative leaders, again, giving a perspective not only myself but our conference in terms of some of the things we'd like to see talked about and maybe made part of the budget, and also some things that we felt shouldn't be part of the budget discussions, at least at this junction. So that's the nature of, as they say, making sausage in Albany. It's not very pretty, but eventually, hopefully, you get it all done.
So, as I said, there are three different budgets now that are out on the table, the governor's, the Assembly's, and the Senate. When that happens, there are these meetings of joint budget conference committees, and you head up one of those committees that kind of oversees all the others that take care of things like education, healthcare, transportation, and so forth. At that meeting, that first meeting of those conference committees, I'm going to guess that you went through a list that was similar to what you put in that letter to the governor. So let's take a look and listen to some of the things you outlined, and then we'll come back and we'll talk more today with Assemblyman Brian Kolb.
But certainly as we're sorting out those pots of money and where they're going to go, we would certainly encourage additional money to go to the CHIPS program and for local control, not controlled by the regional economic development councils. Certainly we have a lot to talk about with workers' compensation and the state insurance fund. In terms of school aid, again, we would like to see a priority given to the gap elimination process and funding formula and focus on the high and average needs school districts that need our help. Certainly when we talk about school safety, I'd like to see us within the budget framework find help and funding for school resource officers for those schools that do not have school resource officers in our state. Mandate relief certainly is an ongoing topic, but certainly one of those proposals that the governor had put forth on having local decision-making on sales tax extenders. I would agree with that, and we agree with that, to try to lower local government costs in terms of processing these extenders.
Let me pull one of those items off that list out front and center, and that's mandate relief. That's been a recurring theme that we've heard from you during this budget process. That I get the impression that your belief is if you could get significant mandate relief here at the state capitol, that would actually take care of a lot of the other problems that are on the table for discussion right now.
Well, mandate relief lowers costs, and lower costs means less need for revenue, which means lower taxes. So it's all connected. And certainly just this past weekend before the budget conference, the New York State School Boards Association recognized me as the State Leader of the Year award for my advocacy on mandate relief, and a bill that I put together have been pushing in Albany to give school districts mandate cost relief. And this is something I've been talking about in a variety of different ways, and that's why I mentioned again for our budget talks.
The schools are in a tough place right now, and I'm sure the schools in the 131st District are no different than they are in other parts of the state where they're feeling a huge pinch. They've got a property tax increase cap on them. They can only increase it 2% from year to year. But at the same time, they're seeing this cap that was imposed on them by state government. Now state government's also, to many school districts saying, well, that state aid that we give you, you're going to be seeing less of that too. So it's kind of a double whammy for some of them.
Well, but there are school districts in our state, Mike, that are much wealthier. In upstate New York, which I think is some of the hardest hit school districts, lower wealth districts, high needs, low wealth, average needs districts who need more financial assistance. The upstate economy has really not grown as much as it needs to grow, which is a negative pushback on not just school districts but local governments. And that's why I've been making the mantra of jobs, 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 and economic development being at the top of the list, because if we create positive economic activity, we'll generate new businesses, new jobs, new economic opportunities to increase a family's annual wages to help their household. So that there's so much to this. It's not you can never look at these things in isolation, but you have to look at how they're connected. And certainly that's what we try to do. I try to do every day when you're dealing with, quite frankly, legislators that come from New York City, and I'm not saying this in a negative way, but legislators from New York City that do not have a clue about what's going on in upstate. And they worry about subways and mass transit versus roads and bridges, which is why we talk about more money for the CHIPS program, which is Consolidated Highway Improvement Program. So these are the regional differences, without being negative about it, that in a budget discussion, have to be explored in much more detail.
We talk about it all the time. There have got to be New York City legislators who have never stepped foot on a farm, let's say, let alone seen a cow up close and personal. And not that there's anything wrong with that, as the expression goes, but how can you possibly really understand what farmers go through in terms of running their operation when you've never spent any time? I mean, this is a very diverse state.
Well, the top three industries in upstate, I think, agriculture, tourism, and manufacturing. In New York City, it's tourism and the financial services area in terms of some of the main drivers of the New York City economy, as an example. But there's definitely a difference, obviously, between the urban centers versus suburban versus rural, regardless where you live. And there's so many things to regional differences, but we all have to appreciate the differences, but try to find not a cookie-cutter approach, but I keep emphasizing a regional approach that is specific to a region and its strengths and opportunities for improvement, rather than just a one mass program that's supposed to try to fix everybody.
In your role as the Assembly's minority leader today, you stood with many members of your conference and business leaders from across the state talking about one particular issue, and I think it's one that you're going to need to explain to people. It's not one that maybe rolls off the tongue very easily for you folks that are watching this program, but it has to do with utility costs, right?
Well, it's a very easy one. Our utility bills, for all the people watching, both homeowners, apartment dwellers, businesses, every time anybody that's paying a utility bill, there's a surcharge on your energy bill. It's called a New York State energy tax. And it's every single month. It was put there back in 2009. It's been there ever since. It's supposed to sunset, which means ends this year. But what the governor has proposed is a continuation of that energy tax on your utility bill for everyone that pays utilities. And it's to the tune of about $500 million a year. Over a 5-year period, that's $2.5 billion of money being spent towards the state budget, rather than staying in the pockets of families and businesses. And I've been advocating, as long as the business community, to get rid of this energy tax on the utility bill, so that money can stay in families' pockets, and with businesses, they can use that money to reinvest and hopefully create more jobs.
Let me show part of your remarks from that press conference. You talked about the sunsetting issue. And I thought what was interesting here is that you then spoke about the ideas from your conference to try to change the vision, the mentality of how things get done here in Albany. Let's go to the tape, and we'll be back with more today from Assemblyman Brian Kolb.
This is clearly and purely a revenue source that has been tacked upon the consumers and businesses of our state for the last 5 years. And as it's like everything else in Albany, we say it's going to sunset, then all of a sudden magically we start to talk about maybe continuing on a tax. And I know there's other areas that are starting to hit the press right now in terms of revenue sources. And really, again, one of the things we've always tried to focus in our proposals as a conference is what can we do to actually shrink the size and cost of state government? Instead of continually to look for revenue sources, what can we do to bring in the cost of Medicaid, the largest cost program in the entire country? What can we do to further consolidate state agencies to, again, lower costs, like consolidating the Thruway Authority and the Department of Transportation? So this isn't, we have always tried to offer public policy ideas and solutions to live within our means, and certainly also to promote public policies that will help encourage businesses and families to stay here rather than looking at one more reason to maybe not stay here.
That really is a different idea than what we're used to here in Albany. It's usually budgets that go up and up and up each year, with the idea being we need this new program, we need that new program, we got to find a way to fund it because all these programs are so important and will do so much good for so many people. You're talking more about living within means. We've got enough money to spend. We just have to figure out and prioritize the right way to spend it. That's different.
Well, because we do have a spending problem rather than a revenue problem. Now, we have slowed the growth of spending over the last couple of years in state government, but there's still this. Our budget is not the most efficient way to spend money in every single program in every single area across the state. So we continue to advocate for, before we go looking for new taxes or adding revenue streams, look at how some programs are wasting money, where there's waste, fraud, abuse. How can we shrink the size and have smarter government? And we can transition the labor force. It isn't about massive layoffs or massive cuts. It's just over time, people retire. You can shrink the workforce very intelligently and very smoothly. And certainly, I think these are some of the things that we don't talk enough about in Albany.
Last couple minutes to this program, let's go back to that idea of school aid and what Albany is doing in terms of aid directly to the school districts. In particular, let's talk about Ontario and Seneca County schools.
Well, first and foremost, everybody keeps forgetting that back in 2008 when we had the massive recession, that really hit state governments all across the country. And then when there was a stimulus program from the federal government that tried to help bolster, to really, quite frankly, prevent massive cuts in spending at the state's level, and New York State was no different. But we're still trying to right-size that budget. But still, schools would tell you we're not giving them enough school aid based on what was originally promised through the original foundation aid formulas. But we have increased state aid over the last 2 years. This year, in particular, $800 million more than last year. But in that $800 million that the governor proposed over last year's number, he wants to split like $250 million of that through competitive grant programs. I totally disagree with that. We should take that money and put it what is referred to as a gap elimination formula, which gets more money to the high needs and average needs school districts, which are right in my district and really, quite frankly, in upstate, rather than having grant programs that the governor gets to decide who gets some additional money based on certain school districts.
They make application for that grant money, and they sort of competing against each other. Is that right?
Well, not really. What it's doing is it's a grant program that rewards a school district that hasn't been pinching its pennies over the years, and those school districts that have been monitoring the revenues, like many do in upstate, they get left out of that competitive pot altogether.
In 20 seconds, can you give us any kind of an idea on library fundings this year?
Well, the library funding that the governor proposed was flat over last year. I have proposed that we should add another $4 million to libraries. We certainly have the money within the budget. They've been flat for several years. And in libraries, again, in upstate, these are center pillars of our communities that sometimes is the only access on the internet, especially in the rural communities. So we should increase funding the libraries, and that's another area that I've been advocating for as well.